One thing my therapist told me was, and this has kind of helped me, and I think this is just good with anything in life, is she said, Paul, you can't take it personal. Sometimes people do things that maybe wrong us, but it's not personal sometimes. So for example, what she said was, she's like, do you think that person woke up and was like, at 10:59, I can't wait to cut in that middle lane and just cut Paul off? But we end up making stuff personal about ourselves, right? So I think, yeah, if you try not to make things personal and take it too personal, I think it'll also help you also learn how to empathize with people
100%.
more, right? See where their perspectives are. For example, like you said, with your friends or people in your classmates who are doing that, you could be like, oh, very, very judgy about it, but now because you have empathy, now that you're not taking it personal, you can see it for kind of from that outside lens.
Yeah.
You can say, oh, you know what, like, that sucks for them. Like, they probably had a really shitty childhood growing up.
Yeah.
And that's why they're doing this, right? But
Yeah.
if you don't have that perspective or that ability to have empathy, you'll just be like, look at these idiots. What are they doing?
Yeah. Welcome to Guys That Listen. I'm Peter, and today we got special guest Paul on the pod.
Hey, what's up?
What's up, brother? Can you introduce yourself to the audience?
My name's Paul Sugimura. I'm a real estate agent. I'm Chinese and Japanese. I've been doing real estate now for about, I would say, 7-8 years now. So, yeah. But firstly, before I get into myself, I wanted to give you guys a huge shout out because I was here. I got to see, how far you guys have come. Like, the studio looks amazing. You guys have been adding a lot of upgrades. Like, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that people can't see. Like, so I just want to say, first and foremost, like, great job. You guys have leveled up so much, and like, I think like that's really one thing I want to say is like, you guys have done a great job. So yeah, big ups to you guys.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It takes a lot, and I'm glad that some people know about it, and it's a process. We're not perfect by any means, but as long as we're getting the work out there, it's all good.
Yeah, because it's been a year since I was last year with my fiance, and like, just seeing the studio, all the stuff you guys have been doing. I mean, you and I kind of talked a little about it yesterday, but yeah, like, you guys have done a great job, and like, I'm actually very, very happy to like and excited to be on the pod, and just really excited. So yeah, thanks again for having me.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Always.
Yeah.
But let's go into it.
Sure.
So you do real estate. You're Chinese and Japanese.
Yes.
I'm sure that plays a big role in your identity.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting that you brought that up. It's one thing that I really do talk about a lot. Normally I really identify more as like I would say more Canadian actually than even Chinese and Japanese. Just growing up being fourth generation Japanese, it's been very, very kind of an interesting thing that my brother and I have also been doing and our family's been doing. So we're actually planning a trip in October to go Japan for the first time. My dad, who's over 60, has never been before.
What?
Yeah. So what happened was the real reason why we're going is because my brother brought up maybe about 6 months ago at a family, maybe even before that, maybe about a year ago at family dinner, saying how he's like, I want to talk to you guys about I don't really know my Asian identity. Yeah.
Oh,
and
wow.
I know in a lot of people who come on the pod and stuff, like, they don't, it's very interesting for me to listen. Like, for example, my fiance, she identifies very, very Asian, right? Like how her parents are, kind of the maybe some of the traumas, I guess you could say, right? Like, she has, but for me being very Westernized, I actually don't experience a lot of that. So for example, my mom and dad constantly tell me that they love me. I get a lot of, like, before I even flew out here, my mom was like, she said, say hello to all your friends in California. Tell them that I'm praying for them. I hope you have a blessed time out there. I love you, and I'll see you when you come back. And I can't wait to hear and talk to you about everything that you've done. So, like, I do realize that very, very fortunate to have that sort of experience because, my parents, they've done a very good job of kind of building my brother and I up. They do a great job of really showing us a lot of affection, right? That maybe you wouldn't necessarily get in an Asian household regularly. But then again, but with that kind of the caveat comes that kind of the lack of identity sometimes for my brother and myself, especially with the World War II, what happened, with all the Japanese being sent to the internment camps, and, my grandparents, they lost their businesses, they lost their fishing boats, and then they kind of just had to make their way over to Canada, over out from the East Coast, from Vancouver to Toronto. We really started to see that, I think, it was just a lot of hurt from the Japanese side of it. So even at like my family dinners and stuff, it's funny, when my fiance came, we have like 70, 80 people. Like, it's a big family get together, but not one person speaks Japanese.
That's insane.
Yeah. Everyone speaks English. Everybody speaks English. So Linda, when she first came, she was expecting people to be speaking Japanese on my dad's side. Not one person really speaks Japanese. They can speak it, but the language that they identify with is actually English.
Oh, wow. That's a wild number, dude. 70 and no one really.
And our family is so big. So just to let you know a little bit about the Japanese culture, like on our side. So my dad has, my grandmother has brothers and sisters. So we have to split it up. So we have the women have theirs to get together and the men have their get together. So we both all got together. Now, unfortunately, a lot of them have started to pass away due to age, but we probably would have had like maybe 120, 130 people. Yeah, it's big. It's massive.
That's crazy. And that's all on your Japanese side?
All my Japanese side.
Wow, that's funny because on the Japanese side, you have a bunch of you guys reproducing. And on the Chinese side, they're trying to regulate the reproduction. Very conflicting.
Yeah.
But wow, that's insane.
So it's interesting because when I meet people for the first time as well, they're always like, oh, like, did your mom and dad, because, you know, sometimes people say like Japanese and Chinese relations, but I'm like, if you meet my dad, right, like my dad plays hockey twice a week. I grew up playing hockey. Like my dad doesn't even actually identify, if you ask him what he identifies as, it's mostly Canadian.
That is so interesting.
And I used to identify myself as Canadian.
That's so interesting because I've started to hear that from certain people.
Yeah.
And it's shocking to me because like I never say like I'm American, you know. It's interesting. I would say like I'm Vietnamese, you know. And but I've gone to countries where you know they don't identify as their ethnicity.
Yeah,
you know, I went to Denmark and I have cousins out there,
right?
And they're all half Cambodian, half Vietnamese, and they all identify as Danish.
Yeah.
Like we're Danish.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh shit, that's wild.
Yeah, like we're like growing up, we were taught to be very proud about being Canadian. Like my dad is a very proud Canadian, and my mom is too. I mean, she's been in Canada for I think 20, 30 years, right? So over 20, 30 years. Obviously, I'm 33, but she's been there for a very, very long time. Early 80s, I believe, is when my mom came over. Don't fact check me on that, but yeah. So we're very, very Canadian, I would say.
Yeah.
Like my mom did try to teach us Chinese or Cantonese growing up, but then I guess my brother and I didn't really identify. You know, we just really wanted to be more Canadian more than anything. So
you want to assimilate closer to Canadian society.
Now looking back, like I'm like, damn, I should have like really paid attention and like, you know what I mean? Because
that's so interesting. Well, is there like a big like Japanese Canadian community out there?
No, there isn't. So it's quite small, I would say. So I grew up in a Japanese, so the church that I went to is called the Japanese what is it, JGCT. So JGCT is where I went to, Japanese Japanese Gospel Church of Toronto. Obviously, it's been a while since I've been to church. So that was, we were one of the first Japanese churches like in like all of Toronto. So like when they first started, like we have like pictures from like the OGs at my church. There's like only like 5 or 6 people.
When you grew up, what was the ethnic group that you grew up around?
So for me, when I grew up, I was actually growing up in Toronto is a great city to grow up in because all my friends are all very multicultural. So actually growing up, I didn't really start making a lot more Asian friends until maybe after high school. Now, my high school was predominantly Asian, but a lot of the people that I hung out with were actually not Asian.
Because I hear this a lot from people who go to schools where there's not a lot of people that they can identify with. And they're usually like, why do I feel like I stand out? Why do I feel like there's no one that understands the things that I'm going through?
Yeah.
You know, because I grew up in a predominantly Latino community, right? So most of my friends were Mexican. Right. But, you know, ever since I was younger, it was well known to me that I was not one of them. You know, like I dealt with racism. Yes. You know, and they'd be like, hey, what's up, Chino? You know what I mean? Like with the slant eyes and shit like that. So like right away, you know, I think the first time I heard that I was like 4 years old. And I was like, okay, there's a difference between us, you know? So like I always longed to identify more with my Vietnamese side because I was like, oh, why is everyone treating me differently? So therefore, you know, I was like, well, let me seek people similar to me, you know, and I really didn't have like a huge group of Asian friends until after high school also. Just because, you know, like in school, you just identify with the people that you're around, right? And I didn't really have that group in Santa Ana, you know, and it's funny because not much further out, like literally a city down, there's a bunch of Asians, right? I just didn't grow up around it. Like I would only see them if I went to like an Asian supermarket or Asian restaurant, and that was it. But in your case, like, did you ever have that thought growing up?
So it's actually really funny now. I think growing up, I didn't know if I really wanted to be Asian. Like, it's very strange because I'll go into, now it's not like this as anymore, obviously, but when I was younger, like I would go into, like, for example, like a Chinese grocery store, and I'd feel like a foreigner. Like, even when when I used to see other Asian people, I'd feel like almost like a foreigner because I'm like, oh, we're kind of different. And even when I meet Chinese people and Japanese people, it feels so different when I meet somebody from Japan or I meet someone from China. Because recently, even my neighbor, who I know, he lives next door to me, so he's from China, and he actually came over to our place, and he was like, he was in culture shock himself. He's like, wow, you guys are so North Americanized. So that's one thing I am starting to realize more and more is that, I am very North American influence, I would say.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I kind of want to talk about this.
Sure.
Over here we have Asian people who grow up in different communities, right? So there's like huge white population out here, like in Huntington Beach, Fountain Valley, stuff like that. So if you grew up there, if you're Asian, you stood out like a sore thumb, right? Yeah. And the very common thing for the Asians who grew up in like a wider like school is typically like they stray away from being Asian. They want to assimilate closely to their white peers as much as possible, right? Like they actually will stray away from the Asian things, even though if they grew up with it somewhat, right? And I think that's so interesting because then, I think a lot of my friends, not a lot because there weren't that many Asian people with me growing up, but the few that did grew up in the Latino communities, we didn't really feel that. If anything, it pushed us more towards our Asian side.
Right.
And I wonder what that is, why that dynamic changes based on who you're surrounded by,
Yeah.
Because, for us, it's like, okay, we're more Asian now because of, being in a Latino community.
Right.
You felt like you weren't Asian. And, a couple people that I've known, Asian friends of mine that grew up like whitewashed, same thing. They're just like, oh, no, I didn't want to bring certain dishes to school, because they would look at me weird. I didn't want to speak my language. It's just anything Asian, they just stray away from. Some people they wouldn't even want to learn how to use chopsticks, things like that. It's crazy how much you try to assimilate into that kind of group.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is like realizing, going back to like thinking about myself in like school, right, in adolescence, which is like the funniest thing because like when you're in school you want to just try so hard to fit in and you care so much about these people, right? But then when you get to like our age, who gives a damn what these people thought about you? In fact, you probably don't even talk to over 50 to 60% of those people you went to school with. But I think like that's the part of, when you're just a child, right? You're just trying to figure out life. But now in my, older years now, I definitely do embrace being more Asian. I do enjoy having a lot of Asian friends. I am open to trying a lot more dishes, maybe they're, a lot more Asian influence, for example, but I'm open to it. Chinese influence, I'm open to it. I'm even taking Mandarin lessons now, right?
Wow, damn.
So that's how like I just really want to try to assimilate myself and like just be proud, right? Like, so now when people ask me, I always say Chinese, Japanese, Canadian. But before it used to be, oh, I'm Canadian, and then I'm Chinese and Japanese.
So you haven't been to Japan?
No, we're going in October.
Okay, and that's wild that your dad has never been to Japan. Yeah. Because for me, I came here by boat, so I was here when I was like a year old. Like I was a fucking kid, right? But I went back to Vietnam when I was like 5. So throughout my childhood, I've kind of always understood what Vietnam was like.
Right.
Being back and then going back in my adult life too.
Right.
And I felt like this part of me that I can never explain was explained through the experiences of being in Vietnam, being in the motherland,
right.
And so I'm curious as to how your experience is going to be, because there's a lot of things that are innately in me that I can never, ever explain why, and maybe because my family was very small being out here. It was just my immediate family, like literally brothers, sisters, mom, dad, right? Like my cousins and stuff, like they're everywhere else but here. So, there was no one else to show us what it was like. Right. But then when I went to Vietnam, I was like, holy fuck, some of you guys are like me. Like, what I mean? Like I have some habits that are like the people, and that's not even a family thing. That's a cultural thing.
Right. Definitely. So
it's interesting how it could be relayed to me, even though, I wasn't really part of that community growing up.
Yeah. I think for my brother and I, we would probably identify more as Chinese more than anything because my mom is from Hong Kong. So on my dad's side, we're fourth generation. But for my mom, she immigrated here. So she still carries a lot of her Chinese tendencies as well. So if I would have to say between the two races, I would say that my brother and I probably identify a lot more with Chinese.
Oh, wow. And have you been to Hong Kong?
I've been to Hong Kong. So we went
so how was that?
So when we went, so my mom, one thing that I really learned was I gained a lot of gratitude for my parents and my grandparents, I should say, and my mom, because like where my mom grew up, like was ghetto. Like she grew up in Kowloon, where they would have like, I think my mom has nine brothers and sisters in total, and they were literally like 9 of them and they were stacked, just sleeping on top of each other. My oldest aunt, rest in peace to her, she ended up being the sister mom. So she's taking care of all of them. And they just grew up so rough. And then to see like where they are now, like coming here to Canada, all of them, like most of them, I should say, you know, they all have really good lives, generally speaking. It's just very, like, even you hearing that you know, got on the boat, right? Like, yo, that is real. Like, that is some real stuff that you're actually dealing with. Like, and to be able to think about the hardships that they had to go through, and then obviously yourself as well. Like, I just appreciate and respect those people a lot. And it always gives you perspective on life. And that was one of the biggest things that I think I gained going to Hong Kong, was perspective, and just seeing, okay, this is why my mom acts certain ways about certain things. Like, so when we were growing up, my mom did not want to waste food. She hated wasting food. And my brother and I, like, whatever, you throw it in the garbage, it's okay, you know, it's a little bit. But then seeing where she came from, I'm like, obviously, because they didn't have enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's also one of the things that my brother and I have started to realize about like our, like looking at my parents and stuff, is like, or at least specifically my mom, is like that not having enough mentality sometimes. And
scarcity.
Mindset, yeah. And I think a lot of immigrants do carry that mentality as well, as that scarcity.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one thing I definitely noticed. But it was really great to get out there in Hong Kong, and I love Hong Kong. It's a great place. Still have some family there as well. So yeah.
Oh damn. Okay, yeah, that's dope that you learned that about your mom.
Yeah.
Because you know, same thing. You know, going back to Vietnam, like I learned so much about my family and how, you know, they react to like certain things in America. You know, it's like the same thing. Food was like a thing. Also, like obedience was like huge.
Right.
You know, like you said, your parents would, you know, tell you that they love you and probably give you hugs. You know, over
all
here
the time.
Yeah, my parents gave me beatings and yellings, and but I understood why. You know, it's because where they lived, it was like very unsafe. You know, like it was just like, it was poverty, right?
Sure.
And people take advantage of you. Like when people are in poverty, people do things that are desperate sometimes.
People will do some crazy things. I mean, even my uncle actually almost got kidnapped in Hong Kong. My mom tells us a story where basically like my uncle just went missing. And thankfully, my grandfather was able to find some people, and they were able to help locate him and stuff. But what my grandfather told me was, at that time, kids were always getting kidnapped. And then what they would do is, because it was so impoverished at the time, is they would cut off some of their limbs so that they could beg and get more money. Yeah. Wow. And then when I hear stories like that, and then knowing how my childhood was, it just makes me appreciate and be so thankful for them even more. Because I'm like, like you have to worry about going to school and getting kidnapped? Like, that's wild, right?
Yeah.
That's like the furthest thing from my reality, but that was a reality to them.
Yeah. You know, you telling me that reminds me of like the story of Buddha. Like, you know the story of Buddha?
No.
So Buddha was the one that people reference to the most. His name was Siddhartha. He was like a prince or king, I forget. He was a prince actually, and his whole life was basically sheltered.
Right.
Like he never saw sickness. He never saw dead people.
Right.
They took care of him and hid everything from him. Right. And then one day he was able to get out of the castle or wherever, and he like walked the streets and people were like begging for money. Right. People were dying. You know, people were sick. And he was like, what the hell is all of this? You know, and then that caused him to think about a lot of things and why people suffer and how come, you know, like people end up in those situations, right? And then that's how he came to like being enlightened, because he was like, oh, suffering is it deals with like attachment to things, right? And if you're not attached to anything, you don't suffer because there's nothing to like hope for, and nothing that you could lose. Right. And that's interesting because in your case, you're like, oh, I grew up in such a nice upbringing. My parents told me I'm loved. And then, you hear these stories and you go to Hong Kong and you're like, fuck, this is a reality for some people.
Yeah. Like my grandfather, hearing about like, the Asian style of loving, right? Like never said anything. My mom was afraid of my grandfather. So he was he used to be at sea. So he worked in the British Royal Navy for a very long time. And then, obviously being on the ship and stuff like that, there's obviously sort of things that he's probably experienced as well. And yeah, so it's just, like I said, just kind of bring everything back full circle. It has made me very appreciative of my parents because I knew that, maybe people weren't as, maybe their parents are a little bit different than my parents, but I didn't realize that, especially in the Asian community, that's like very unheard of. So whenever I tell a group of Asians that, oh, my mom like tells me I love you all the time, and my dad says I love you, son, and like they're like also generally very, very supportive of me, and like they don't really put me down, right? But then I hear from my friends, they're like, oh, your parents don't put you down, they encourage you to follow your dreams, like. And that's when I really start to realize, oh, there is a really very different culturally, like my experiences. So like, for example, my fiance, we're both Asian, but our upbringings are 100% different. Just like me and you, I bet our upbringings are very different as well. Kind of like you alluded to, right?
Yeah. No, that's so interesting to hear that side, because what's funny is that you said our upbringings are different, and you did not once say like mine was good compared to yours. It's just different. And I do think that all these things that I dealt with growing up, I would deem some of it as negative, right? But it's almost like because I learned that it's negative, therefore I'm not gonna take that out on the next generation or whatever, right? Like I'm not saying I'll ever have a kid, but assuming if that's like the case, that's where I would want to end up, is where your parents ended up.
Yes,
if that makes sense.
And it's funny that you said that, because my mom said the one thing that she did was she said, I wanted to make sure that you two never experience what I experienced. So my mom goes above and beyond to like really just spread her love. And anybody who meets her, she's just like that. Like she's the salt of the earth is what I say. Like her and my dad, they're salt of the earth. God bless them, and they did a really, really good job. But like going back to what you said, like I don't actually think any experience is better than one. I think everybody has their pros and cons, because at the same time too, my parents are very, very Christian. I couldn't even remember my church's name like 30 seconds ago. Oh my goodness. If my parents watch this, they're going to be like,
disown you.
What is wrong with this guy? So, I think like every relationship and every sort of, there's always goods and bads, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
No one's ever perfect. I would say that.
No, definitely not. I think it's up to us to figure out, as we learn more about how we work as human beings and society. Like we're like, okay, I think this we could continue to do.
Definitely.
This we should remove from our habits, right? Or our culture.
100%. And I think there's probably, I think that the difference is, like, especially when I tell people, is we have an extra layer of generations here in Canada. So it's like it's almost like for you guys, when you have kids, like you said, it's not gonna be the same, right? You're gonna have your American influence, and you're gonna kind of see like, okay, these are some things that I like that they did well, and I want to add that to myself. And it's the same thing with my parents. There's some things that I really love that they did, and there's some things I'm like, maybe not.
Yeah. It's funny because it's gonna take some time, right? Like we're. I wasn't born here, but I came here when I was very little. My sister and my brother were born here,
right?
And we still, because we're first generation, we still have habits that are very Asian, that's almost American mixed. So for example, like if we have Thanksgiving dinner,
right,
we don't get turkey, we get roasted duck.
So funny you said that, because Linda, the first time she came to my family dinner, she was like, oh my gosh, because we do the mashed potatoes, the turkey, like the whole spread. And she's like, wow, I've never seen a Thanksgiving dinner like this. She's like, I just see it, but now I'm actually experiencing it. And then I realized that, because I used to always think growing up, like, everybody else does this. It's not like this. Like 100%.
Yeah, that's wild, huh?
Yeah.
Like we're still living in different phases of our adaptation to where we're at.
Correct.
Like your family seems like assimilated very well so far. Linda on the opposite hand, and my family, still has like a lot of Asianness in the way we, handle these holidays, right?
For sure.
But yeah, wow, that's so interesting. So being that you grew up in a family is very loving, like you're churchgoer, did you feel like being in school with kids that maybe didn't have that kind of love, or not, like maybe that kind of pressure to be, because I'm assuming the religious side was like, you have to be very good.
Yes.
Right? I'm trying to find a better word for it, but very good, a good boy, Yes. Was it strange to you to see the opposite of that when you first
it was. I do realize that my religion definitely has a lot of influence on the way that I would see things. But I have found out as I've gotten older to just be a little bit more open-minded to everything, right? I think that you can really get... I think that's what the beautiful thing about life is, and meeting new people all the time, and meeting people who are diverse, who even though we're Asian, we're still very different, right? So I think when you can open your mind to having... and listening to other people's perspectives and actually openly listening to them, I think it just gives you a full broad picture. Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, definitely. Because when I grew up, in an area that wasn't like that nice, kind of poor, we came here and we're like, my dad's working minimum wage. My mom's not really working because she has to take care of the kids. Yeah. So you can only do so much. But even then I was in a Latino community, so I didn't really fully understand how different we were in that side. Right. Because those ports where like the people around me were like gang members and stuff like that. Right. But I didn't grow up with that because I just stayed at home with my parents, only until I got into, I want to say, high school did I start seeing those things more where I'm like, this is how bad it could be, because we only had ourselves. I didn't really see the other things. So a good example is the first time I had ever seen anyone do cocaine was like in 9th grade.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was one of my Mexican classmates, and it was a girl, right? And I was shocked. I had only seen that shit in movies, and even then I didn't really fully understand because I didn't really get to watch those kind of movies. But I remember she pulled out a baggie from her lipstick holder thing, right? She pulled a baggie out, and then she like cut it up with a card, and then she like snorted a line.
Wow.
And she had asked me to like hold to her lipstick thing.
Yeah.
That's why I saw it. I was like, oh shit, what the fuck? Did she just do a line off the table right now? But obviously, to do that as a 9th grader means that you were probably around it probably much earlier on that. But how many years of life have you lived that time? 13, 14 years? So that was insane to me. And that was the first time I had seen it. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, even though we're in the same area, we're experiencing life very differently.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. That's wild, man. That's actually very wild.
Yeah.
That happened.
It became way more apparent to me how common that was in like a community that just didn't have as much money. The first time I saw someone do crystal meth, it was like fucking 11th grade or something like that. And it was funny. It wasn't even just like one person.
Yeah.
It was funny. My teacher at the time had just left class. Yeah. They always do when the teacher leaves class, right? Not gonna do it right in front of your
Everyone's
teacher.
Gonna screw around.
Yeah, exactly. And this guy starts lining up in the pipe, and then
that's
6
wild.
other kids came and did it.
That's crazy.
And even like the nerdiest fucking kid came up and took a hit. And I was like, whoa. Okay, we still live in a very different life. Even though you live down the street from me,
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. But now, because of that, in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, oh, I'm glad that I got exposed to it a little bit later.
Right.
And it just makes me think like how much more control it's given me.
For sure.
As like, these things happen. Like, obviously I've talked about on the podcast, I've done drugs, like not meth and shit like that. Right. But, I've done substances where I'm like, I'm so glad that I'm at this age where I can be level headed about it versus just, I don't know where, like we said, I haven't spoken to my classmates in forever. I don't know where they're at in life,
Yeah.
And I've seen a couple, like, not even that many years outside of high school,
right,
and in really bad situations.
For sure.
And I was just like, holy fuck, dude. Yeah. Like, that's unfortunate that you're around that because, like, as a kid, where do you get it from? You either get it from other kids or adults.
Yeah. Somebody's giving it to you. Yeah. As a child, you're not just like, oh, let me just go to my backyard.
Yeah, like, somebody's going to go to my plug.
Yeah, no, exactly. Let me hit up my plug real quick.
Yeah, exactly.
No, 100%. So let me ask you something then. How do you feel that that's affected you, like growing up and seeing that? Did it have a negative or I guess positive effect on you?
You know what? I actually didn't do any drugs until outside of like smoking cigarettes or like drinking alcohol until I was like 25. Mm-hmm. It was weird because I there was something that really stuck with me as a child.
Right.
And I was actually really against smoking cigarettes. I don't think I smoked a cigarette, like really, really smoked a cigarette until I was like in my 20s. Mm-hmm. And I felt like when I was younger, I used to like smoke cigarette butts or whatever with some friends when we were dumb little kids, but never like had bought my own and smoked it. Yeah. And the reason why was because my dad was a avid smoker, you know? And growing up in school or going to school, you know, you hear that smoking is bad.
Right.
That's one of the first things you see, right? I grew up with the commercial of the lady with the hole in her throat, and she could only smoke through like that hole, you know, and that stuck with me.
Those ads are like, yo, you want to get scared? Watch one of those ads.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you know, me loving my dad, thinking like, hey, you should stop doing that. That's terrible. You know, that's terrible for your health. Mm-hmm. And you know, I was very close-minded about it because that caused me to think that people who smoke, they have no self-control and they're just bad people. Literally, that's how I grew up thinking up until the time where I decided to have my first full cigarette, right?
I see what he's doing. Maybe he's got it the right idea.
Yeah, you know, I was stressed too when I did it. Sure. And it's funny because, you know, my brother also went through the same kind of ideals as me when we grew up thinking about that. And I remember we had this instance where I had smoked my first cigar. So the first thing I ever really smoked was not even a cigarette. It was a cigar.
Oh, dang.
Right? I was celebrating. I forgot. I think it was like me and my girlfriend's like 1 year anniversary. So we bought cigars and we're like, we're going to smoke. 18-year-old, you know, like, let's have a fucking cigar. So for whatever reason, I felt compelled to tell my brother because we were on the same boat as to tell my dad to stop smoking. So if I'm going to change my mind and do something that we were advocating against for a while, I should let him know. So I told him, I was like, hey, just to let you know, I smoked the other day. It was me and my
wow, you just like went up to him and told him, eh?
Yeah. It was me and my then girlfriend's like anniversary. We decided to buy cigars and we smoked.
Yeah.
And then he was like, I remember he said this to me. It was probably the craziest thing, and it still sticks on my mind. He looked at me dead in the eye and said, I never looked up to you anyways. And then he turned around and he walked away.
Oh.
And I did not know it had such an impact on him, you know? And I think at that point, like we were so distant in our relationship that he didn't see me kind of going that direction. You know, because I was, you know, legal age, going out with friends, you know, going having drinks and stuff like that. And then to see me do that was like the one thing
that crushed him.
That crushed him. I honestly, now that we talk about this, it's the first time I think I've ever talked about this on the podcast. I don't think our relationship ever really recovered from that.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's crazy.
Of course. And it's just interesting because I just thought we were distant only for specific reasons, you know. I think what it was you know, why would you have that kind of reaction, right? And I think it was because he probably felt I betrayed him.
Yes. I think too, like, because I have a younger brother, right? And you're the older brother, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like, even like, for example, thinking about my parents, right? So kind of taking it back, I think we look up to them so much, right? And then this one thing that I used to do is like, if my parents, so growing up in my house, if you swore once, you getting that, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble. And the first time I heard my dad swear, poor guy dropped something on his hand. So obviously he's going to be like, shit, right? I was crushed. I was like, I can't believe he swore, right? And I think maybe that's kind of the similar situation where maybe perhaps, you know, he thought so highly of you and
it's
thought
like
that
the glass shattered.
Yeah, and thought that you're perfect, right? You know, and like that's what I would always think, like, oh, my dad's like perfect, this perfect guy. But I think as you get older, you realize that no one's perfect, man. Mm-hmm. We're all just trying. And one thing, my fiance, she got me to listen to Brene Brown. So thank God. She's really, really good author and everything. And one thing that she said was, everyone's just trying their best. And I hope that your brother, you know, if he's listening to this, will also know that you're just trying your best. Yeah.
I mean, we definitely haven't recovered from that, but certain areas of our, you know, brotherhood is stronger. Certain areas,
Okay,
you know?
yeah.
But definitely that created a rift for sure.
Bit of a rift. Yeah.
Definitely 100%.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's funny because only until you're put into those situations do you realize like, oh wow, I'm no better, no different. And I think that really shifted everything for me. That was the biggest shift. And I'm not advocating to smoke, right?
Of course. Not at all.
I'm just saying like me being put in a position where I'm like, I thought I was so high and like righteous.
Yeah.
And then I did the same thing that I fucking told people not to do. Then I'm like, oh shit, I'm no different, and I'm capable of making these mistakes. Just like anyone else. And that's allowed me to forgive so many things about not just other people but myself too. And I think that's what it is. Like I don't think necessarily you have to commit the same act to do that. Hopefully you could have open mind, because that was just the gateway. And now I don't even I've never done meth or anything like that, but I'm like, okay, unfortunately I can see that it's possible for me. Right, I've done other things like how far am I from there, but I'm learning to choose not to. Right. So other people, unfortunately, it's very similar to my classmates in high school. They were just exposed to it at such a young age, or they went down this rabbit hole that it's hard to get out. It's very hard to come back out of.
But I think one thing I will say is, one thing I am knowing about you and seeing a lot about you is like you have a good ability to empathize as well with people, and I think that's what a lot of us really just need to focus on more, is just having some empathy for people. That's one thing that my therapist also, has been teaching me over the last, 2 years. So one thing that I always share with people is when it comes to driving, I can be a little bit mad sometimes behind the wheel, especially doing real estate. You're rushing to showings, you got to get in, you got to get out. And, one thing my therapist told me was, and this has kind of helped me, and I think this is just good with anything in life, is she said, Paul, you can't take it personal. Sometimes people do things that maybe wrong us, but it's not personal sometimes. So for example, what she said was, she's like, do you think that person woke up and was like, at 10:59, I can't wait to cut in that middle lane and just cut Paul off? But we end up making stuff personal about ourselves, right? So I think, if you try not to make things personal and take it too personal, I think it'll also help you also learn how to empathize with people 100%. More, right? See where their perspectives are. For example, like you said, with your friends or people in your classmates who are doing that, you could be like, oh, very, very judgy about it. But now, because you have empathy, now that you're not taking it personal, you can see it from that outside lens. Yeah. You can say, oh, you know what? Like, that sucks for them. Like, they probably had a really shitty childhood growing up. Yeah. And that's why they're doing this, right? But if you don't have that perspective or that ability to have empathy, you'll just be like, look at these idiots. What are they doing? Yeah. Right? Exactly. Things you don't understand. Yeah. Right. And I think I've talked about this too, where I said I've become more empathetic because I've become more understanding. Right. And to some people, what does becoming more understanding mean? Right. And it's weird because it's actually in the word. Like, it's just for you to understand more. Yeah. Right. So in order for you to understand more, you gotta like talk to people. Yeah. You gotta do some research, study up. And I kind of want to talk about this topic. Yeah. I think this is interesting. I've never brought this up during the podcast, but it's something I've been very much into. So, for a while I was seeking to be more empathetic, right? And that was nice. It was good. It was a great thing for me to learn for my body, my mind, my soul, like to be more empathetic. But then I went down this road of learning how to be more compassionate. And that's something that's completely more foreign to me than empathy, And how I came down that road was, there was this topic that, it's weird, the algorithm is nuts, right? I found this video that they talked about the idea that there's no such thing as free will. Right? Have you heard about that? No, I have not. No. So, well, I guess we'll go into it. Because I'm Christian, so growing up in the church, we believe in free will. Actually. Yeah. So I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. There's scientists out there, like neuroscientists, who study the mind, the brain, and they say basically you just, as human beings, we just react to the things that are in our environment, and there's not really a choice being made, because whatever we're processing has already been decided by the reactions of everything that's happened to us in the past, everything that's within our genetic makeup. Okay. So for instance, they were talking about how let's say I ask you a couple questions, right? And I'll tell you, like, let me know when you kind of
try and figure out what the answer might be, right?
Right.
And they'll have like a fMRI where they see where, you know, the brain lights up or where the blood flows. And there's parts of your brain that makes decisions and things like that. And that part will light up, and then by the time the person says like, oh yeah, I'm thinking maybe between this or that, the part of the brain already kind of turned down, meaning the decision's already been made.
Interesting.
But in your mind, you're still processing. You're like, oh yeah, I haven't figured out yet. I'm thinking between these two things. Right. And it's funny because, you know, I talk to you outside of the podcast, but I love hearing when science from different areas back each other up.
Right.
And I like pinpointing these things. Right. So, you know, the idea is that, you know, because of your genetic makeup, because of all the history that's been passed through your genetic makeup, you react to certain things in certain ways. Right. And without your environment, and the things that you go through, your circumstance, you wouldn't react to it in those specific ways that you do. Right. So if your brain already has made a decision based off of whatever's happening and you're just processing it, that means that you don't even know that's already been decided. Right. And you think that there's free will. You think that there's still a choice to be made. Right. So recently, you know, what's the company that Elon Musk owns? The one where they implant a chip in your brain? I think it's Neuralink.
I forgot. Is it
Neuralink, right?
I think, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
But anyways, one of the first guys who got it, he's like an amputee, right? He's like, he doesn't have his arms. Right. I don't know if he has his legs either. But anyways, he's one of the first people because he get a lot of benefit from it, right? Because now he can control machinery with his brain, with this chip that's in his head. Right. So anyways, one of the things that he loves doing is playing first-person shooter games. So they plugged him into a computer where, you know, he doesn't have any hands to use the mouse, so he just uses his brain. And in the interview that they talked to him, he said something very interesting which aligns with whatever, you know, the idea of no free will was. And he said that, you know, it's kind of like a cheat code, right? If I, you know, like if I'm looking at a screen, like I have perfect aim, right? There's no
room for error.
There's no room for error because you just like think and it goes there. There's no physical mechanics to make room for error. And he said the strangest thing was that before he even decides who to put the cursor on, it's already been done.
Oh, whoa, really?
Yeah. So
that's crazy.
The way he's thinking in his mind, he's like, oh, I'm still making this choice. The choice has already been made.
Interesting.
And that to me aligned exactly with what they're saying. I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. But you know what's funny, as I was learning about the idea of no free will, I went to like an existential crisis, right? I was like, what the fuck is the point of life then? You know, like everything's like decided by, you know, your circumstances, your environment, your genetic makeup. And so this is where the talk about compassion comes in. So, you know, the guy that I listened to the most, his name is Robert Sapolsky. And he says, like, if you use this idea of no free will and things are not really, you know, like a choice, then you shouldn't put so much weight on bad things or good things. Right. So for instance, like, let's say someone does something terrible, right? Let's say someone kills someone, right? And if the idea is that they didn't have a choice, like that's just because of their circumstance, all the trauma they went through, you know, and their genetic makeup, some part of their brain that didn't develop correctly. And then it ended up being that they made that terrible decision. Right. And it's not the by choice. You could almost use the idea of let's say a natural disaster, like an earthquake or, you know, a hurricane or a tsunami, things that kill people. Right. And you don't pin any kind of hatred towards those things. You're like, they have no choice. It just does what it does. Right. And you just think, oh, well, that's like unfortunate that it's a disaster and it happens. But you're not like, fuck that hurricane or fuck the earthquake. You're just like, oh, it is what it is. You know, you try to avoid it. That's pretty much it.
That's a pretty interesting, actually, way to put it. I've actually never, like, this is the first time I've actually heard somebody kind of put it that way. So no, okay.
Yeah, and because for me, the reason why that really resonated with me was because when I was younger, like, I don't know how this thought came in my head, but I never understood the overpraising of people who are genetically gifted. So meaning, like, whether you're really good looking or you're just extremely talented in something, I'm just like, well, you know, they're fortunate. Right. Like, damn, that's awesome that you get that. You're lucky enough to be born with good looks. Or you're lucky enough to be born with talent. But I'm like, what did you do to earn it?
You know, to that point, I will say is I think whatever you believe in, whether it's God or the universe, I feel like people who are maybe good at that one thing, there's probably a bunch of other things that maybe they're not so good at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and on the flip side, when people are really bad at something, I'm like, I'm not like, I don't condemn them or demonize them. Like, it's like someone's like really awkward or clumsy. I'm not like, I'm like, unfortunate whatever circumstances brought you to this point. That sucks, but it's not like your choice. No one wakes up and they're like, oh, I want to be fucking clumsy. You know what I mean? I want to fucking be awkward, whatever. No one.
I can't wait to drop 6 drinks on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. People don't choose these things. So then now because of that, I don't hold any kind of grudge or resentment or anger towards these things. If anything, I feel more compassionate. I'm like, damn, that's unfortunate. Because if you listen to these people's stories, people who do bad things, it's not like they grew up in like the perfect fucking household. No,
generally speaking, it's not like they're like, oh, white picket fence, great family loving. Yeah, generally,
there's always fucking something. Always something. Right. Whether it's like something that seems indirect, like they hit their head when they're younger and they had concussion, and all of a sudden their brain changed. Right. And like, it's funny because the guy that I was listening, he uses another example. So the example in the idea of like free will or not, and how we learn to be more compassionate by understanding why people are the way they are due to their circumstance and the events that happen in their life. He used the example of like, I think he said it was, so don't quote me on the time frame, but like 100 something, maybe 200 something years ago, when people, if they were outdoors and, let's say a child or adult would throw a tantrum, they would yell and scream and kick whoever, you would just be like, this guy's a fucking idiot, or he's a moron, or he's a maniac. And then you find out about like autism and you're like, oh,
so shit. Little we know, like when you think about like back like 2 people ago, like it was wild. Like we're very, very fortunate to live where we're at right now. Like even if you go back 3 generations, we got a problem, let's go outside and have a sword fight.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
Oh, you got killed? Oh, because we had to just... Sure,
I didn't like that lady down the street. She's a witch. Go lynch her. Like,
it's crazy.
We're barely, scratching the surface right now.
I agree.
And that's what I mean. It's like, if we had thought like that, like, oh, back then, why the fuck is this person doing this? What's causing it? And then we come to learn like, oh shit, they're on the spectrum to a certain degree, and that's just part of like their genetic makeup that's causing them to be like that. You don't get mad at an autistic person for throwing a tantrum, do you? 100%. No, you don't. So that's why it's like, people like, don't get me wrong, like the idea now is like, what do you do about the people who do harmful things? Like you protect yourself, just as with anything else. Hurricane you can't do anything about that, right? You just get the fuck away. You know what I mean? Like, just don't be involved, right? So obviously there, and he talks about basically the protocols and the law system too, right? It's like, okay, well now if that's the idea, people don't really have a choice and it's due to their upbringing and the circumstance, then how do you sentence someone to jail or whatever, right? Because for instance, like, in the justice system, if someone pleads insanity, something's wrong neurologically, then they get out. Right? But no one who kills someone like that is sane. There's something fucking wrong that's causing them to be like that. And the more we understand it, the more preventive measures we can take. But sorry, we're going down the rabbit trail.
That's okay.
But what I'm trying to say is like that viewpoint has given me so much compassion towards the people that I see around.
For sure.
Who, like if they act up, I'm like, what happened?
I think having that sort of thought, like if we could just all just be like a little bit nicer to each other, I think it actually would go really, really long way.
It does.
Like if you could just, there's somebody who needs help crossing the street, you just help them across the street, holding the door. Hey, how are you? Like, you're doing good. Like, just being friendly. And sometimes people, all they need is just to have somebody say hello to them.
Yeah, right? 100%.
So I think, but that's good that you think that way, for sure. And it's something that I try to adopt, especially as well in like my sales as well, and being like very understanding towards your clients. So so I've been doing real estate now for 7-8 years, and one thing that I would say is definitely having that empathy for your people and your clients. Like, it's, for me, I always tell everybody, right? Some new agents will always approach me and they're like, oh, how do you deal with clients that are, maybe they're unsure? And what I tell them is, I said, you have to empathize with them. Like, see where they're coming from. Maybe it's the biggest purchase of their lives. Maybe they have family pressure. Maybe they have spousal pressure, right? If you constantly just make it about yourself, then it goes nowhere. Right. So I would say, like if you can just have compassion for people, see where they're coming from. For me in my business, it's helped a lot. And I think that's part of the reason why I've grown. And I think therapy is also one of the reasons why I've grown. And my business has actually blown up. It's actually like when you look at the statistical numbers of the sales that I've done since I've started therapy, my numbers have actually gone up.
Oh, wow.
Quite a bit. And it's because I realized, so for example, let's say a deal didn't go through, and this is early on in my career. I would be like very upset about it. And I'm like, oh, how dare they? Like, you know, I drove him here, I drove him there, blah, blah, blah. But like, then I started just making it about myself. And then I stopped prioritizing what my clients need and what their wants are, right? The way I see it is, you know, doing my job is, you know, we're blessed. So there's like over 75,000 real estate agents in Toronto. Right. So for me, I always look at every new client as like a blessing. Like, oh, this is awesome. Like, thank you for choosing me. Let's get something done. Right. But with that being said as well is also I've learned doing this is sometimes you can't work with everybody either. As you know, doing, you know, your own stuff, you're in mortgages too, right? Like sometimes you can't, if it's a square peg and you have a circle, sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, that's always been a strong suit of mine whenever I talk to clients. It's like how we could relate and how we could talk and like how we could empathize with each other. Because, you know, one of the things about, especially being in sales, you know, is that if the person doesn't like you, they're probably not going to work with you, right?
100%.
And like, what better way for you to do that than to build a relationship versus just treating it like a transaction?
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is, dude. Like, I think in society, especially now, the way people treat things is so mechanical.
Yes,
right?
it's very
like,
transactional.
Well, yeah, transactional, one for one, things like that. Even when people talk about relationships, right? Like I don't really know too many of these people. I see it online a lot, which is crazy because I'm like, where do these people exist?
Yeah.
Where you know you'll see people interview like females on the street and they'll be like, oh, what's the minimum height for a guy? You know, like 6 foot something. How much do they gotta make? Like $200,000 plus, right? What kind of cars do they have to drive? Things like that. I'm like, wow, why is it so like specific to a point, like to the dot? And I think obviously, you know, they've done things to rebuttal that where they put in a calculator and see how many people fit in, and it's like a delusional amount, right? Where it's like you'll never find that person, basically.
Yeah.
But why has it become like this? Where I think before the idea of like relationships and love was a little bit more free flowing. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I think especially in our industry, one thing I will say is people have a very good bullshit meter now. Right? Like people already know like, oh, like you just want to talk to me because you just want my business. Yeah. And one thing that I try to adopt is, you know, having a transformational relationship with somebody as opposed to a transactional relationship.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So basically what that means is, to me, is that you really want to be like when you're working with that person, the relationship that you're building is something that you're going to build for life with them. And in our business, that's so important, right? They're trusting us to help get them somewhere, right? As we talked about it before, biggest purchase of their lives. And there's so much pressures behind that. So they're like, okay, I've worked 10 years to save up this amount of money. I'm going to reach out to Petey. He's going to help me. He's going to help make sure that I'm getting a good rate. My money, like once that it's all tied in, right? So having that person that you can trust and know that they're not going to, as I always say, fuck you and screw you over, right?
Yeah.
Excuse my French, but they're not going to screw you over. That's what a transformational relationship is. And it's also a transformational relationship because they know that you have their best interests at hand. So you're looking out for them. And they want somebody who they can trust and that actually gives a shit about them. That's not like, oh, thanks for the deal, see you later, never.
All right, so I want to go into the dark side of being in a very good and healthy family, because that sounds weird. It sounds like I'm just trying to look for problems.
For sure.
But you know, everything comes with pros and cons, right?
100%.
And we were talking about a little bit about your dating life almost.
Yes.
And how, you know, being in, you're Catholic, you said?
Christian. Yeah.
Being in the Christian household, a very Christian household, because you know there's
Christian.
Different levels.
Yes. You can't tell my mom nothing about her Jesus.
Yeah.
To give you a little bit of a scope, so one of my very good friends was helping my mom out. So she was doing a charity golf tournament for housing projects close by our house, and it was raining. The whole day it was raining, and my buddy goes up to my mom and he goes, Mrs. Sugimura, were you afraid that it was going to rain? She looks at my buddy and goes, Jordan, don't be silly. We're doing Jesus's work today. My God would never let that happen. and just walked off like a gangster. But let me just say, it was completely sunny for the rest of the day. So, I don't know. She's like, that's the type of level she's
that
on.
level. Okay, you're painting the picture for me.
Yeah.
So going back to the dating aspect of it,
for sure,
must be very different than you know. For instance, for me, as soon as I've had my first girlfriend, it was like they couldn't tell me nothing.
100%.
They were just like, all right, do whatever you gotta do. You know, like be safe. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So in your case,
it was very different growing up. You know, obviously, again, don't want to put my parents on blast because I love them. You know, but they're very, very, principles is very important to them. And I think that's where I get a lot of my strong principles too. But yeah, going back to the whole dating situation, they had a very hard time with me moving in with my fiance until she became my fiance, were they a little bit more open to it. When it came to back in high school, bringing girls over or whatever, the door had to be open. I had an ex who lived in Chicago, and when she would come and stay, I would literally sleep in the basement. And she would sleep in my room. And whenever we were together, we had to keep the door open. She had to come to church. So all that stuff.
Well, she had to come to church.
Yes. But now they're a lot more open, I would say, over time. I think they've also started to see how things have changed. And they have never forced my fiance to go to church. They've never said, you need to do this, you never need to do that. So I think they've grown a lot too. But back when I was younger, oh man, we couldn't watch Simpsons growing up.
Whoa, yeah. You went?
Yeah.
You grew up without the Simpsons?
Grew up without the Simpsons. It's funny. Linda always laughs about it. A lot of my friends, I couldn't watch Mad TV. I couldn't say damn in the house. There was a lot of things that we couldn't do. So it's like I said, it's very interesting hearing the way that I grew up because we say grace all the time. We were joking recently with Linda. Accidentally, she grabbed something, and then my dad was like, "Oh, let's just say grace then. We should say grace." But she's not used to that, right? But my family always says grace before we eat.
What religion is Linda?
I think she's Buddhist.
Okay,
but not practicing. I'm Christian, but I don't really practice that much.
Did you ever see yourself now that you're at your age, in hindsight, being with someone not of the same religion?
Back then, no, because growing up in the church, it was very encouraged for us. Even last couple of years before her and I were dating, my parents always encouraged us to find somebody of similar faith. So to ask what I see myself, probably not. Back then, no, not at all. But I am starting to realize now, as I've gotten older, that it's just about respect more than anything. And that's what I think my parents have done a very good job as well with Linda now. Again, getting older and getting better. We all learn as we get older. They've done a very great job of respecting her views and respecting what she believes in and respecting what my brother's fiance believes in, right? So, yeah. So
when was the shift for you when you're like, whoa, okay, this person is not Christian, but I dig it.
yeah. I mean, as somebody who doesn't really practice that much, that's kind of what I always do. It's I can't really judge people. If I'm not in the church every Sunday, who am I to say this about somebody else, right?
Yeah. And I do think, I don't know everything about religion. I know a decent amount about Buddhism because I'm Buddhist. I'm not Buddhist. I was Buddhist. I'm just nothing now. But I do think that there is a lot of similarities in religion. At least what people view as ethical.
For sure.
And I think that's something that you could pretty much practice. Even without it, right? And I think that's where you guys, at the very minimum, have to align, right?
Yes,
that's
yes.
As a person,
I think that's a good thing that we do about for each other is we respect each other and we respect the views that both of us have. So she's a little bit more obviously more towards the Buddhist side, and I'm obviously towards the Christian side, but we don't let that kind of come between us, right? I think, and it's just like in anything in life. Maybe you like the Green Bay Packers, maybe you like the San Francisco 49ers. Sometimes I think one thing that I will say is kind of that I just thought about leading on to the next point is that I think that a lot of times now people are not okay with agree to disagree.
Yes.
Right? If you don't believe in what I believe in, we cannot be friends. But in my mind, I'm what happened to the days where it's okay, you don't agree with maybe you're okay, we'll just use Democratic and Republican.
Perfect example.
Right? Perfect example. Okay, if you're Democratic and I'm Republican, so what, right? Maybe that's just one thing that we don't agree upon. But now it's if you got to be either this or you got to be either that.
Yeah.
right? And I just think that that's really just, I think there's a lot more conflict that gets created with that as well. Yeah.
I agree. I think there's a lot more conflict even internally.
For sure.
Right. It's almost like I had a friend who came on here and he's highly religious.
Right.
Right. And he was saying if he even mentions God, he could feel like how apprehensive people get around him. So therefore he holds it in.
Right.
Even though that's what he wants to talk about sometimes.
Right.
And that shows that like you can't show your true self sometimes. That's what you're learning through these examples, you know?
For sure.
And it's something that sometimes we have to unlearn, right? And obviously there's certain people that it doesn't work with, and that is like a boundary they might have in place, and you respect that. Right. I think that's probably the healthiest way to do it is like to actually speak about it and then see where people stand with it. Right. And it's funny because I've learned a lot about myself and the things that I've held back because, you know, there's even now as at my age, I still feel myself holding back like what I want to say sometimes. Right. And it's not due to the fact that I might be overstepping boundaries. It's due to the fact that I'm fearful of what they have to think about me if I do speak about it. So an example, which is crazy, I don't know, I still haven't really unpacked this specific example, but I talked about it with my friend recently. I rarely ever ask my friends about their relationships. It's super rare.
Why do you think that is?
See, so because I'm fully unpacked, I can't really pinpoint it exactly, but I think what it is like when I grew up, whenever I did talk about relationships with my friends, they would always say like, "You're too cynical." You know, like.
Do you feel like it's because you are afraid that maybe your opinion will change your dynamic? Like you're afraid to almost rock the boat?
It's a little bit of both. I think it's also like if I view their relationship as negative, right? Their significant other might not like that,
right.
Or my friend be like, "You don't believe in my decisions, or you think I'm making the wrong decision."
Yeah.
So then I've learned to like bite my tongue about it.
Right.
But you know, I'm different now in the way I think about relationships. Right. Like I would say it's less cynical. Still probably somewhat cynical compared to what other people think out there. But that's a big aspect of my friend's life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like who you're dating is like
very
a
important.
huge portion of your life.
Yeah.
And I would love to know more about my friends, but yet at the same time, like I'm not asking them, right?
Yeah.
And I recently just came to that conclusion, like probably 2-3 weeks ago.
Right.
Where I was in the car with one of my friends.
Oh, this is like really recent.
Really recent.
Okay,
like I was in the car with one of my friends, and I never asked her about her dating life. Ever. I've never asked her, has she been, and people ask me all the time. People ask me all the time. People are always like, "Hey, Pete, are you talking to anyone? Like anything new?" And I never reciprocate it. You know, I'm just like, no. And then
the convo's over. Next topic.
I'm never like, "Oh, how about you?" You know?
Yeah.
So why is that? Why am I so apprehensive about asking? Yeah, I think part of it was because it almost like I was demonized for my viewpoints when I was younger, right? And now, like I would like to say that because people come to me for relationship advice like frequently. So so they come to me, right? But I don't ask them, and it's because like it's almost like if you come to me, then you open up that door and you're allowing me to speak.
Right.
Versus if I ask you, it's like it almost feels like I'm intruding on your relationship, something so personal to someone, you know. And it's weird because like sometimes I think all of us, we all think we have good takes from time to time, you know.
Yes, definitely.
And now I think the reason why I feel more like adamant on speaking about it is because I've seen some relationships turn out really poorly,
right?
Where there's some really, really terrible decisions being made, and I didn't speak about it at all.
Right.
And it's funny because like usually when those things happen, they're not going to open up to you about it.
Right.
It's like, "Oh, I did something fucking really bad, Pete. This is terrible." So I don't get to hear that side, right? But then if I hear about it from elsewhere or see it, I don't ask either, you know? And I'm like, "Oh shit, am I doing a disservice to my friends?
Yeah.
I know something is truthfully terrible for them in their relationship,
definitely.
and something meaningful to them, which is like their significant other."
Right. Interesting. I don't know. For me, I always try to. I guess maybe I'm just more nosy, I guess you could say. But I always just try to do like a lot of check-ins with everybody that I know, like all my friends and stuff. Like whether it's through like Instagram. So as you know, I'm huge on the Instagram stories. To me, Instagram has actually been one of the greatest tools for me because it allows me to keep up with multiple people in like real time, so I can see what they're doing. I can see that they're out. So, but yeah, man, I think like I think you still do a pretty good job, maybe outside of the relationship, but I'm sure there's a lot of questions that you ask that are very thought-provoking that most people probably wouldn't ask either.
Yeah. I mean, I'll talk to you about every other aspect of your life.
Right.
But then when it comes to relationships, I'm like, okay, lips are sealed, you know?
Definitely.
But it's important. It's huge, and it plays a huge role in the people's lives, you know? Like, I've, talked to my cousin about a couple things, right? He went through a low relationship problem, and even then it was like he had to approach me for me to talk about it, for me to give him advice and, tell him like, hey, maybe you should think about this side.
I do feel like, though, especially because you have your own platform as well, like maybe that's why too. Maybe you don't want to feel like you're a know-it-all as well, because you talk with a lot of experts. So a lot of experts are giving you also a lot of good advice too that you can kind of give out, to your friends and share gems or whatever, right? So I think maybe that might be it too, right?
I think it's also another thing you said that kind of stuck out to me, which is you said maybe you're nosy.
Yeah.
I don't know what's causing me to be like this, but I try to stay away from anything that might be considered nosy. And I have and it rubs me the wrong way when people are too nosy, right? So
I see.
So I have a.
Wait a second. What are you trying to say?
No, I'm just like, I don't feel like you've ever overstepped that boundary. So you're not definitely the person in question.
Yeah.
But I have a group of friends, and all they do is gossip.
Oh yeah.
Like,
That's not cool.
it's tea time. What are we gonna talk about now? Or one of my buddies, he always says this, he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go do my homework." He's gonna find out more about these situations, and they love that, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I'm just like, isn't there anything better for you guys to do?
But
also at the same time, I pushed it back so much
true.
that I'm like excluding myself from that portion of my friend's life.
You just got to try to find that little balance,
right?
Yeah. But that's like anything in life, right? You just got to find the balance.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe I'd be a little nosier.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let me get a little nosier now.
Okay, sure.
I'm asking. You've been with Linda for how long now? How many years?
3 years. I believe 3 years. Yeah, pandemic, pretty much, during the pandemic. We got together during the pandemic. So it's like 3-4 years ago now?
4 years. 4 years ago. Yeah. And you guys got engaged.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I'm going to ask. Like,
sure.
When did you know that she has to be the one?
We went through a lot of ups and downs, like all relationships do. The one thing that allowed me to know that she was going to be the one was that we were both open to just continually having good lines of communication with each other, and we were both open to continually working on ourselves. The one thing that I think about is, sometimes people get stuck in their ways, and then it builds up resentment, and then now we've been together for 30 years, right? And now we don't even talk to each other, right? So, and then I've seen things where, maybe then the kids get involved, and then sometimes parents use kids against each other and stuff like that. So for me, I think it was really the whole aspect of, her just really being willing and open to working on stuff. And actually, she's the reason why I did couples therapy. So, we went through a little bit of a rough patch, and then, I said, oh, we should do couples therapy. And she said, we can't do couples therapy until you do therapy for yourself. And I was like, oh, that's a bar right there. That's a legit bar. That is a legit bar. Like, oh, I'm not going to do it if you don't go yourself. So I said, you know what? Let me just go myself. Now, I heard like a lot of bad things here and there about other, sometimes people said, oh, that's not really good. And some people said it was good. But yeah, because of her, I've been with my therapist now for the last two years, and I told my therapist I will continue to see my therapist at least once a month for the rest of my life.
Wow.
For the rest of my life. Yeah.
That's another commitment.
Yeah, exactly. And leading back to that is, the reason why is because I know that she is there she just wants the best version of me. And she wants me to be the best version of myself. And I feel like we're both coming as two separate people. And this is one thing that I definitely have to learn through therapies. We're both two separate people, and we're coming together to create something together. But we're still having our own separate identities. And I love that she just always encourages me to be the best version of myself, for sure. Yeah, because I mean, we've all had that, like, waste of time or whatever, gone so many day or whatever, you know what I mean? And where you feel like, oh, this person doesn't genuinely care about me, but like actually having someone who genuinely cares about you, definitely, like it made me think that she's the one. And with that being said, like every relationship too, there's lots of ups and downs. And that's one thing that I definitely had to learn, was that like through my therapist and even talking to my parents too. My dad, I love him, gives me really great advice all the time. He said to me, he goes, son, every relationship is not perfect at all. Your mother and I have been together for over 30, 40 years. My parents love each other. But you know what my dad said to me? We got into a fight 2 hours ago before we talked on the phone. We were bickering about something, but we still love each other, and we still apologize to each other, and we still figured out how to work it out together. My dad said, your mother and I still try every day to be the best versions of ourselves for ourselves, right? So that's one thing that I definitely take from them, is like solitude. And that's why I kind of knew with her, I'm like, okay, she wants to try, I want to try. We want to keep trying. And yes, it's not going to be perfect. Yes, we're going to be upset. Yes, there's going to be times where we really don't want to talk to each other and we're really upset with each other. But if we can take time to breathe, relax, then we can have a conversation.
So going back to the therapy thing.
Sure.
Like I kind of want to ask you, since she played a big role in it, right? How has it changed your relationship?
It's helped me a lot in terms of, one thing that I learned going through therapy was that I had a little bit of an inferiority complex. I found out through therapy previously. So like, obviously most people meet me, I'm very funny. They say I'm funny. I sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but funny, outgoing, confident, right? But I did start to see that I do have sometimes, like, I wouldn't be really confident in my own self. So externally I'm like, yes, but internally I'm like, oh, like it's the whole world is on fire. But one thing that I've been learning through therapy is mindfulness. And being mindful of yourself. So knowing that, for example, doing sales, right? So this is one thing that always is on my mind, is I'm always worrying sometimes about like sales. Where are they going to come, right? Because our industry, nobody's coming to save us.
Yeah.
If we decide that we're not working, nobody's putting money on our table. We don't have a salary. We don't have, like, we have to go out and get it ourselves. And I would always be like, oh, fuck, like, when's the next deal coming? When's the next deal coming? But then when you start to do these mindfulness practices, you know that you're going to be okay. You do the work, you keep doing what you're doing, and everything will work out that way. So that's definitely one thing that's really, really helped me, is continuing to be very mindful and having the gratitude as well. Because that's the other thing that's also been very helpful for my own self, is expressing gratitude. And Linda's done a great job of that as well. She has a gratitude journal that she's releasing. So just going to plug my fiance here. But she's actually the first person to actually get me into gratitude journaling as well. And that also really helped me, because let's say I'm worrying about like, oh, when's my next deal coming? But then I look down on the paper that I wrote the 3 things of gratitude. So like my family, I have food on my table. I have a roof over my head. Those 3 things already. I'm like, what I'm worrying about, not as big of a deal, right? So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, I think it makes sense in terms of like how you're better, but like, just to be more specific, like, how have you implement those things that you learned from therapy into your relationship?
Oh, into my relationship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm laughing because there's things that I'm still learning and that I still have to practice and do. I would definitely say the learning to actively listen, and this is something I'm still have to work on, but learning to actively listen, as opposed to, like, I find sometimes, like, in a relationship, especially when you get into like arguments, for example, you're like, the person's talking to you and you're like, yeah. But like, really, you're not actually listening to what you're saying. You're like, I can't wait till they finish talking so I can tell them the 1,000 things that I want to say, right? But learning to actively listen is saying, okay, let me take in what you're saying. Let me try to, and this is very, very hard. Like, I'm not saying this is something that I still struggle to deal with, and her and I are still working on it, is, like, actively listening. One thing that we have done and we're continuing to prioritize, and something that we are still working on as well, is we have an hour for each other. So where it's just us. And what we do is, if something is bothering us, that is the time that we bring it up, because we have a coffee together. We're not angry. There's no high emotions. We're sitting there. It's just the 2 of us talking. And that's one thing that's really helped our relationship, and that's something that we still need to continue to do more and more, especially with the wedding stuff coming up. We definitely have to, talking about this now, I'm realizing like we need to continue to keep doing this. It's been very, very helpful for us because, again, now that the emotion is removed, you can actually actively listen to that person, and like you're actually really listening to them, and you're actually feeling their feelings and feeling what they're saying and really empathizing with them. Whereas obviously if you're in an argument and you're mad, you're really not listening.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the two things that I think have been really, really helpful for us. And the other one is calling pause and time out. One thing that I found with both of our relationship is my family is the way that is like, we're just going to keep talking. Like we're just going to talk it out. If it takes hours, we're just going to talk it out. One thing that I learned is that not every family is like that. So what we have now done is when we feel unsafe, or we feel that we use the word unsafe, or we feel like we're not being heard, we say time out. And it's up to the partner to respect your partner. And if she says I need time out, that means I need to give her 30 minutes. If I say time out, I need 30 minutes. Even maybe I need more time. But that way, again, similar thing. When we come back together, we're not heightened by our emotions, and we're both ready to actually come to the table and talk. Yeah. So those have been really, really helpful for both of us. The timeouts are really important because, like, for her and I, like, now me not so much anymore, but I used to have a really short fuse. But like having those timeouts is really great because it also prevents you from saying things that you may regret saying after.
Oh yeah, definitely, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've came to the same conclusion. Right? I used to be exactly like you of the past, right? Like I would want to talk things till the wheels fall off, right? Like I would fucking talk to where like I didn't even make sense anymore. I would just like try to figure something out, try to figure out a solution while being, angry or whatever, and it would get us nowhere.
Yeah, and you're like, what were we even arguing about?
Exactly.
3 hours later, what was the actual original reason why we were having this conflict? Yeah.
Exactly. And my demeanor was way more aggressive, so it became very unproductive very quickly.
Right.
It's like, don't yell at me.
Right.
Like, fuck, too late. I already kind of started, and then only until I got into my next relationship,
right,
where I was like, you know what, let me give this a try, because obviously it didn't work out with the last one, or that method didn't work out with the last one. There's something I'm obviously doing wrong.
Yeah.
So let me take my time. And like, sometimes I might need to go for a walk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sometimes I might need to see him the next day, whatever it is. And it's crazy because I feel like it depends on your dynamic with the other person on how it's received to ask for something like a timeout.
Right.
So, for example, if the relationship where I was really angry and I, was yelling and screaming and whatever, if I asked her for a timeout, she'd be like, yeah, sure. Take as much time as you need. Because she was like that. This is how our dynamic was.
Yeah.
And being in the relationship, that's how she felt.
Yeah.
And in my other relationship where I would ask for timeout, it was like, no, we got to talk about it now. And it was because, like, if you have too much time for yourself, you're not reassuring me things are okay.
Right.
And I need to know things are okay now.
Right.
The moment you leave me, it goes back to not being okay.
Yeah.
And I did not understand that. I did not understand that the dynamic in which she needed reassurance and security and safety was not what I was giving her, by just asking for a timeout. So it's almost like your approach matters too.
Yes,
for
sure.
Before I'd just be like, hey, I just need to go for a walk, which I think was very reasonable, or I thought was very reasonable.
Right.
But in that relationship, with the dynamic that we had, that was not the way to go about it. Like now in hindsight, if I was in that position again, I would reassure them. Instead of just like, hey, I just need time out, I just need to go. Yeah. I'd be like, hey, like right now, I'm a little angry. Yeah. I don't want to say anything I don't mean. I really care about you, which is why I'm stepping away so that I don't say something hurtful to you.
Yeah.
And to create that reassurance, especially when someone's really anxious in their relationship, like you got to create that safe space for them.
For sure.
Know what I mean?
For sure.
You can't leave them when their anxiety is at an all-time high. It does not work.
So it's funny you mentioned that because I can be like that sometimes, but what my therapist always reminds me is you're only hurting yourself more, and you're only hurting them more when you just continue to chase, because then she's like, now you're not respecting their boundaries as well, right? So I think, to your point, I think respecting people's boundaries is very, very important. And also to your point, finding what works for you. Because the way that Linda and I work is not the same for other people. It could be very, very different for them too, right? Yeah. So it's really knowing your partner. And that's like actually anything in any relationships, even your friends, right? Like, because there are times where sometimes maybe you get at it with your friends, and sometimes you need to be able to respect boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. I think going to the topic of friends and relationships with friends, I've, this is how me and my guy friends are, at least from my knowledge, right? Maybe their perspective is different. Like, it's really, really, like, we care so much about each other, but it's so difficult to bring up sensitive subjects.
I see.
And it's because we're so ingrained in our ways to be like, oh, something sensitive, fuck it, let's just grab a beer and talk about other bullshit. You know what I mean? Let's not make it awkward. Like, we could agree to disagree, but that also gets to the point where it's like we just won't talk about it at all.
Then it just gets swept under the rug.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that I have found, especially talking with my therapist, is men especially, we are very good at compartmentalizing.
Oh yeah.
Like, we'll take whatever the issue is, and that shit is going all the way to the bottom in the vault, and you're never going to see it. So we're very, very good at compartmentalizing. So I definitely agree with you. And I would say, to your point, I do have some friends who are like that as well, where our relationship is like not very vocal, I guess. There are things that we get very deep on, but there's certain topics, to your point, where like never, not once do we ever talk about it.
Yeah.
And I have friends who 20 plus years, similar to you and your guys, right? Known each other for so long, but you just never go there.
Yeah, and I think that's doing a disservice to your friendship.
For sure.
Because I'm starting to understand that it almost makes it seem like you don't care.
Right.
And going back to the whole relationship thing, like, it's not like I don't care. I do care.
Right.
I just don't know how to say it. Whatever reason I feel reluctant to say it. But I do care. I care a lot. Make sure you're good. If you're in a bad relationship, you're probably not good. You yourself are probably not good.
100%.
There's no way.
100%.
There's no way. If you're in a good relationship, you still might not be good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But at least that part is checked off.
Right.
At least that part of your life is checked off, right? You're good on the relationship aspect. So, I want to ask you now, like,
sure,
in your life, being that you guys are now fiancés, so you and Linda, you guys are going to get married. Do you feel like that is going to change your relationship in any way, positive or negative? And this is, obviously, I want to include the word negative because not everything.
No, 100%, right? 100%. I mean, personally, I don't. I think the positive aspect of it for sure, and you can kind of say it's negative too, is we're actually having very difficult conversations with each other, talking about religion. Again, our parents also have different religions, so they're on the very different ends of the spectrum. That's something to think about. Our children, where do we want them to be? What do we want them in Sunday school, at church, or do we want them at the temple on Sundays? Things of that nature. It's like what would I say? It's like you put on your big boy pants, right? Like, and you're having very difficult conversations.
Shit's getting real.
Shit's getting super real, right? And to the point where the negative can come out in terms of there will be conflict. So there is, I would say, with us, there has been times where the conflict is a little bit more intense now because we're talking about very intense conversations. But conversely, it's also very positive because we're actually having these conversations with each other.
It's making you guys closer.
Yeah, 100%.
Making you guys understand things a little bit more.
100%. 100%. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Yeah. But once the ring and shit starts to get real, ring our kids, shit starts to get really real in the relationship. Because now it's not like I had one of my friends, so she recently got into a relationship. I'm like, oh, it's so nice. You're in the honeymoon stage. You're literally showing the best version of yourself. Every time you see, like, everybody, like, first year of dating, I always call it the honeymoon stage because you're at your best, right?
Yeah.
Year 2, when you're not, maybe you're leaving the toilet seat up now. Maybe you're not looking as fresh as you once were, right? Like, that's when the real stuff starts to come out.
That's funny that you brought up the honeymoon stage. I just recently learned something about the honeymoon stage,
right?
Or basically the first moments in dating, right? And it's funny because people say this also. It's like you can't see the red flags, 100%. Right? Because you're wearing rose-colored glasses.
100%.
So there's like a study. I gotta look it up, but basically, when you're going through a honeymoon phase and all these basically hormones and endorphins and stuff that's going around, the part of your brain that figures out if things are good or bad,
right,
it kind of dims a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's actually it's harder for you to recognize like things that might be red flags since the very beginning.
Definitely. And I was going to say, just to that point too, is you actually have that infatuation stage.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because you're just like, wow, this shiny object, right? The shiny gold syndrome. That's what my therapist calls it, is the shiny object syndrome, where you're like, oh, it's so beautiful. And then you don't actually see everything. You're just focused on that shiny object. 100%. But it happens, right?
It does. Yeah. I'm, since I haven't dated in so long, it's funny because I tell people this all the time. Like, it's so much easier to be a good boyfriend when you're not in a relationship. And what I mean by that is, like, you think you've done so much work. You've changed so many things. Now you're ready to get back into be the better version 2.0 of yourself. But there are things that you actually cannot work on until you're in a relationship.
No, I tell everybody this, and my friends will say this too. Like, since having, like, behind every good man is an even better woman, right? Like, without her, like she's definitely added a lot of structure to my life. I'm don't party as much as I used to. So she's definitely helped with a lot of things like that too, right? One thing I did want to also mention too, that my therapist always talks to me about, is that when you're building relationships with people, sometimes there's this thing where, we always try to see like, oh, maybe the grass is greener on the other side as well. And I know that happens with relationships and friends and stuff. But what my therapist always tells me is, like, sometimes you have to, and this is like, this goes even with the podcast, this even goes with your own business, right? It's like you work so hard to build this beautiful home, and you've put so much work into it. So let's use your podcast, for example. You put so much work into it. But sometimes we always just, hey, what's my neighbor doing? What's my neighbor doing? But then we don't actually turn around and look back and like, oh, wow, I built a beautiful house. It's maybe not be the most perfect house, but it's my house, and I put so much effort and work into it. So I think that's one thing, especially that everybody should definitely keep in mind. And it's one gem that I would definitely love that my therapist has shared with me, is that, like, make sure to also see what you've done too. And that's relationships, work, business, anything.
Yeah, I think that's something that people struggle with. I definitely struggle with that. Like,
me too.
All the time.
100%.
And I think it's just because part of me, it's always thinking about the future. So therefore, I'm like not thinking about the past things that have happened. But it's like your life, that's like what you leave behind, right? It's like the past.
Yeah.
So it's like sometimes you do have to stop yourself and think, hey, this is actually a pretty good life that I have.
Yeah.
Like, irregardless of its flaws.
Yeah, for sure. And like, we talked about this yesterday, right? Like, one thing that, my, same thing my therapist told me, she's like, if you would have like gone back 5 years ago and you told like your 5 years ago self, yo, come take a look at what I'm doing right now. Your 5 years ago self would be like, what? Are you serious? Like, imagine your 5 years ago self being like, check out my podcast. Like, how many episodes are you guys down into now?
100 something.
5 years ago, imagine telling yourself that. You'd been like, you crazy dog. But like, look at this, man. Look at this beautiful set you guys have. Like,
thank you, Ram.
You know what I mean?
All right, so
yes, sir.
You're engaged.
We are.
That means that you're gonna have a wedding.
Oh yes.
And with weddings comes wedding planning.
Yes.
Right. And I think this is something that, going to enough weddings now in my life where all my friends are fucking married and here I am single. Anyways, enough about that. I see how it could cause rifts in relationships, right? Because there's a huge amount of stress.
For sure.
And that's not just stress that's coming from you guys dictating what's going on in the relationship, but stress from exterior factors such as your family. Right? Maybe just timelines, maybe the venues, budgets, and all these other things. Like, now that you're in the midst of it, and you feel it, I'm sure you
definitely
feel it.
100%.
Feel the pressure, right?
Yes.
I'm surprised that there isn't more conversation about ways to alleviate the stress, like precautions that couples could take in order, hey, you know what? We're kind of going through it right now. I can see it. It's happening. What can we do to not only alleviate the stress, but maybe bring us closer together? Because what it is I think when you're going through it so often, you forget the reminder that you guys are in this together.
Yes.
And you guys are partners.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So I guess I'll kind of touch on that a little bit. Yeah, we definitely have, there's definitely been a lot more conflict because, especially with weddings, and again, I don't know if this is for everybody, but I think
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, for most people, I guess you could say, is we all kind of have our own values and things that are of priority to us. And maybe in a relationship, it's, it's like the day to day, right? Like there's certain things like, okay, maybe you like this food, and okay, cool. But I want this, but okay, we can go with this, right? We're a little bit more open, so it's not as like, concrete. But when it comes to a wedding, like it's very concrete. In terms of like, I think one thing that we have realized after conflict is that we actually are getting a wedding planner now to help out and definitely help mediate a lot of the things, because we were doing it a lot with ourselves, but having like an actual wedding planner there, I think is really going to be very, very helpful for us, because it's one of our friends. She's very experienced, and she's also good at kind of barking orders. And she's one of my like childhood friends, so like from a very long time I've known her, and she has no problem telling me like, you're an idiot, don't do that. So I think that's been really good, and I think that's one of the things that we've talked about that we want to do. But yeah, man, there's like so much pressures for like wedding and having a wedding, and even like what the couple wants and doesn't want, right? For me, I want a really big wedding, and I've always dreamed of having a big wedding, but Linda wants something more intimate. So that's one of the things that we've been trying to come and kind of find a in between where, we both also feel comfortable, and we both are kind of having the day that we kind of want, right? Yeah. So, but there's definitely been conflict, and it's funny. A lot of my friends know that I'm a very sociable person, so they're all like, oh, it's you. You're the reason why she's getting stressed. All my friends are like, it's because you want a huge ass wedding. And I'm yeah, it's because of me. So, but I've been now learning for myself too, is that, like, and Linda does a good job reminding me that like, this is also a day to celebrate us. Right. So like, keep that in mind. Like the wedding is actually about us and not like all the other people that we invite. So for me, that's been one thing that I definitely have to continue to keep in mind.
It's almost as if you were to replace the word compromise, because it sounds like you're giving up something.
Yes.
With like negotiating.
Yes.
So like you're combining the terms of your partnership, right? Because that's a great idea that you're getting a wedding planner, right? Because you're removing a good amount of work that you guys don't need to be stressing about. For sure. Because that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed with weddings that have a lot of stress with them. They're poorly planned, first and foremost, right? And the day that you're supposed to be celebrating your relationship, right, your partnership, it almost goes into shambles, and that's the back behind the scenes things that people don't see. Right. Like I've been a wedding photographer, so I see the behind the scenes things. And I'm just like, bruh, like she was just fucking cussing him out a couple seconds before saying I do.
They're just smiling.
Exactly, 100%. Exactly, and you don't want to feel like your love is forced on the day that's 100%. So special to you guys, right? 100%. So I think to add on to what you're saying about the wedding planning thing is, maybe have like a select few friends that can help alleviate some tasks, right?
Definitely.
I mean, don't bark orders to them, because I've seen that too. I've seen where it's like you put all the pressure on the bridal party. I'm like, damn, they were like they look like slaves.
It gets hectic out here. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's really important. Like someone that basically is good for you and Linda,
right,
for both sides, versus definitely. Like finding someone that can only help you out.
No, definitely, and I guess it just kind of comes back to like the negotiating and the compromise, right? We both realize we're like, okay, we need to hire a professional to come in and kind of help alleviate this stuff. So and I think to think to what we were talking about earlier, it's just, I guess for me, maybe I had this dream of what I wanted the wedding to be, and I'm sure she has her dream as well, but I think it's also being able to kind of come to like the reality aspect of it too, right? Like I know now that I'm not going to have all the 1,000 things that I want, but there are certain things that are very important to me, and those are the things that I should be able to state and we have a dialogue about it. And I think that's very important for all couples too, right? If you have certain things that you really, really want, don't also be afraid to vocalize them too, because then that unvocalization leads to resentment, and then
yes 100%. And another thing too about wedding planning and being in the midst of things and the stressors,
right,
is not forgetting about the reason why you're there. And I say this outside of, because I've never been married, but I've been in relationships where it's like sometimes you lose sight of why you do things, right? And if you care about this person, like this is something I always say too, like no matter what relationship, always be dating.
Right.
Always.
Right.
So go back to that time, if you're in the midst of things, like go back to them like, hey, can we take some time off to really celebrate each other right now?
Yeah.
Like don't put it till the end.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think that's the thing is like people put it off until the very end. Like, okay, now we could be happy. Now we could be not stressed.
No, for sure.
You know what I mean? Take some time off in the middle of it. Alleviate some of the pressure.
Right.
Go out and like don't even think about it for a weekend.
Right.
So I mean, I know you're here.
That's why. That's part of the reason why we're here.
And that's great that you thought about that.
Yeah.
Because you understand how that could affect your relationship moving onwards. And I say this a lot too. Some people put more effort into their wedding than they do their marriage.
Yes.
And without the marriage part, what is the point of the wedding?
For sure.
And very similarly, in a lot of scenarios, is that you hope to only get married once.
Yes.
Right? I hope that whoever is getting married, that they hope they only have to get married once. So if it's your first time, right? First time ever doing this, like, it's great to have people who've done it before.
Yeah.
Who know, even though like maybe they don't have the same vision as you,
right,
but at least maybe they have some experience that they hand off to you where it's like the little things that you don't have to worry about, the little things that you guys can do to like keep it together. Right. You know what I mean? Not to keep it together, but keep it thriving.
For sure. No, I think that kind of ties into, just trying, right? Mm-hmm. Continually trying to just try and do your best, right?
So, going back to what we were saying earlier about understanding, right? Yes. Like having compassion, empathy for people. I think there is not enough education on relationship and relationship dynamics, right? I felt like, yes, there's a good amount that I've learned through experience. Right. But there are a lot of, I feel like, issues that I could have taken care of or like not been a part of had I learned more about relationships in general. Right. So I want to talk about this. So, I think this is becoming more of a trend now to talk about because I think a lot of people are going through it, which is attachment styles. Right. This is a topic that people talk about a lot. And to me, learning about it, and I'm not an expert, right? But even knowing a little bit has made me feel like I understand my past situations a lot better, and myself too, actually. So that's one thing. We talked about, or you heard me talk about yesterday when I mentioned, my ex. I had an ex who would call me like 50 times an hour if I didn't pick up, things like that. And I would just chalk it up to crazy because things you don't understand is just crazy, right? And now that I've come to understand it, like I also understood my behavior, So to go into the attachment style that I saw her more as now back in hindsight, which is a anxious attachment style. Right. So anxious attachment styles means like they don't feel safe and secure without someone. Those are the people who typically you see get into relationships back to back to back because they need that reassurance, that validation, right? And they're also the people who like will call you multiple times and text, triple text, quadruple text, whatever it's in. And what has helped me in realizing that about that relationship of mine was that I would trigger her anxious attachment style. Because I was, to a certain extent, very avoidant, which is another attachment style where you keep your partner at arm's length, right? As soon as you feel closer, you distance yourself. So to a person who feels secure by getting closer, it's almost like, oh man, these styles really clash. But understanding that she needed to feel safe and reassured that I cared and things like that was not something in my mind really at all. Like when I would see that, like her wanting to pull me in more, I would push back so much. And I was like, wow. And not to say that would have changed the status of the relationship, right? But I definitely don't want to be the person to trigger someone's anxious attachment style or even avoid it, right? But the thing is, people have anxious attachment styles because they want to be close to you. They'll do whatever they need to get close to you, meaning that whatever you want. Right. What do you want to do? What do you like? I'll do that. So a lot of those people, they end up losing themselves in these relationships.
Yes, because you're actually not even yourself anymore.
No.
You actually lose all your identity.
Because you're just that person. And this is something you hear a lot, right? It's like, that's just not a lot in my case. I haven't had that many, but like, oh, that's Peter's girlfriend.
Right,
like
right,
that's
right,
not even the person's name.
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's usually when it happens. Like in those relationships where it's like, oh, you don't even have your own identity anymore, and why is that? And now I've come to understand.
Yeah.
Like some people are very very anxious, and not to say that they can't become better at it, right? But you can't. It's hard to become better at something when you don't know about it.
Yes.
Or where you don't understand.
It's actually funny that you brought that up because Linda's actually talked to me about this attachment style. So all of these things, like I do think that it's now starting to come a lot more to the forefront because I didn't even know what any of these things were. I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
And even going back to therapy, when she said therapy, I was like, ain't nothing wrong with me. That's what I thought originally. I'm like, why would I go there? There's nothing wrong with me. Until you actually, go through it and you're like, whoa, there's a lot that I got to work on myself, right?
Yeah. Definitely. It's funny because like all these lessons, like you can't really learn them until you dig into it, right? Like I'm learning this in my single years. You know what I mean? And I'm learning this hopefully to be better for my next partner, right? But this is something that if I look at it, I'm like, I wish I would have known when I was a fucking kid. Because one of the biggest things that you do in your life is have a partnership, right? And why don't they teach you how to be a more sufficient partner?
For sure, for sure.
I think about all the times where I did things and I'm like, wow, I didn't really understand that I was actually just hurting people. Because if you don't learn how to approach things and understand how everything works, you just go off of impulse. You just go off of intuition or how you feel, emotions, right? Which was definitely how I was handling relationships for the longest time.
Right.
Like I just did what I felt like. And that was very damaging. I'm pretty sure very damaging to my partners, and unfortunately they had to get the shit end of the stick by dating me.
Well, I mean, I think with that is the perspective behind it that like every day is kind of a learning experience, right? The good thing is you're actually aware of what you're doing and you're actually aware of the things that have happened in the past and you're like, oh, I actually want to like make a change. So that is growth, right? But if you're just like, I see it, but I don't really give a damn and I'm just going to ignore it, like then you're just stunting your own growth, right? So that's awesome to hear that you say that. Yeah.
And that's why I want to talk about this here. It's like I'm not an expert, but maybe this is what starts someone into looking into something like that, right?
Sure.
And like, oh, that sounds really familiar. My past relationship was kind of like that.
Yeah.
No wonder. And that's how we understand people better, right?
Definitely.
By understanding these ideas in relationships.
Yeah.
Like to me, I always want to think like I am just the way I am.
Yeah.
But I'm like, why am I the way I am?
And why are you thinking that?
Yeah.
Why have you thought that?
It's because all these things that finally got me to this point in my, later years in life where I'm like, okay, so those things have affected me. And now I don't want to just live life and have it pass by. I want to be able to elevate the things that I'm good at and really fix the things that I'm bad at, like really heal the parts of me that like for whatever reason my ego took precedence over the relationship. Right. I've definitely done that where it's like, I know this is more harmful than it is good, but I'm doing it because of my ego. My ego is hurt.
Right.
And I don't want to be that person anymore, and I think I don't know how to explain it other than the fact that I don't feel like I have the time to work in that space anymore. I think when you're younger, being toxic and being a not sufficient significant other, you're like, it just comes with the territory, because I don't have experience. This is all new to me. I'm making these mistakes for the first time.
For sure.
And people say it too. It's like, oh, you'll just learn when you're in a relationship. Yes, there are things that you can only learn once you're in there. Right.
Definitely.
But there are some things that you could take like a class or, like read some books on relationship dynamics that could help educate you on how to become a better partner.
Yep. Go to therapy, right?
Go to therapy.
So many. Nowadays, one thing I will say is there's no excuses anymore for people to be like, oh, because back then 10-15 years ago you could actually say there's nothing because like even if you look at like NBA athletes, right, or any sort of athletes these days, mental health is like they actually talk about it. But back then they're like, you're soft, what's wrong with you, compartmentalize, continue with your life, right? So I think now is a great time because there's mental illness is such a big thing now. It's huge, and it's great that actually people are willing and open to talk about it too. And that's one thing that I think that is great, is people are really open to talking about what's bothering them, what's going on with them, a lot more than what they used to be, right?
Yeah. I think it's because it was at that breaking point.
Yeah.
Like, people need it now. You know, they're like, oh shit, things are happening. People are getting sick. People are killing themselves.
Yeah.
Like, specifically talking about males, like, suicide rate is crazy high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think all suicides, like 70% males, which is insane. And I think a lot of that has to do with like how repressed our emotions are.
Yep.
And like how we're not able to talk about things, you know? It's funny how something that we deemed as strong as to not be affected by things, you know, to be stoic even in the face of adversity,
for sure,
is now kind of biting us in the ass.
100% it is. I think it's kind of that my therapist calls it kind of like the man culture, because you don't want to be soft, right? Like, you don't want to be soft. Like, oh, I can figure it out myself. Oh, you know, like, I don't need this. I'm gonna figure it out myself. But one thing that my therapist talked about to me was that, okay, because she says I'm a real estate agent, right? So she just uses me as the example. She's like, you're a real estate agent. You want to buy a house? You go to the person who knows what they're talking about. You want to go to a doctor? She's like, if you break your leg, you're not going to go to your mechanic and ask him, hey, could you just like take a look real quick at my leg and see what's wrong with it? No, you're going to go to the expert, right? So I think that there's just so many tools for everyone to use now that we should. And I think as men, it's something that we especially need, because, there's a lot of things that I guess culturally that men are like, there's a certain archetype that you have to be. You have to be a certain way through the movies, through music, through whatever, culturally, right? And I think that one thing that always doesn't get talked about is like the mental aspect of it. It's always like, you got to be tough. You got to be, you know, this macho, nothing affects me type of idea. But I feel like when you have and adopt that, it's actually very sad. You end up being very alone, because you're just putting on a mask every day. And I think a lot of times, all of us, we all put on a little bit of a mask, right? And I think that's also why I think men also sometimes have a hard time going to therapy, is because that macho mask, that shit is gone. Like, I've had therapy sessions where I've like broken down and cried, like very, very, like been very, very emotional. And I've like, to the point where I like, sometimes I'm like, wow, like I never even got emotional about something like that. But talking with that person was great. And I'm one person who always encourages people to do therapy, because it just helps you I believe makes you into just a better person. And the other thing too is it helps you with your mental management, because there's so many pressures that we have these days in life, right? You know, cost of living is really high. Where am I going to live? You know, all these certain things, friends, being single. Like, I'm sure being a single guy, you probably hear it all the time. When are you going to get married? Where's your girlfriend? Like, and okay, maybe these are like little comments that people make, but after a while, it gets a little annoying. Yeah. Right? And those are just things that are societal pressures now. You're getting a little bit older, and then things of that nature, right? So, I always just encourage people. Therapy, I think, is great. And the other thing that I really like about therapy too is, like, I would always go to my friends but my friends are my therapist. And also the other thing that I found is that friends are great to talk to, and I still talk to bounce a lot of ideas off of my friends, but there's some preconceived notions. But having a therapist, they're just going to tell it to you like it is, because they don't have to worry about your feelings. They're just going to tell you like, hey, this is what I think, right? So
that's true. And also to add on to that, I don't think, you know, I know some of us feel this. It's almost like you don't want to burden your friends. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes it is heavy. Yeah. And it's also sometimes not a weight that your friends want to hold. And
nor should they have to. Yeah. Right?
Mm-hmm. Of course. And they do, though. You know,
yes,
fortunately.
Exactly. Because they're your friends, and they want to hold you down, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And, you know, you also do have those friends who will tell you as is, but sometimes there are biases there that, you know, maybe they will sugarcoat things for you. Things that you actually really need to hear. Yeah. And, you know, like for me, I really need to make this thing, because I have not seen a therapist, and I talked about it all the time. And I talk about mental health all the time, yet I'm not doing it, right? Yeah. Like, I've only been to couples therapy, and that's not the same as seeing a therapist one-on-one. You know, it does not, the dynamics are too different. And almost the intentions are different in why you go do that, right? Right. So I'm not trying to weasel my way out of this, but I want to ask you, what are some things that you were able to get out of therapy that maybe someone listening can implement?
That's a good question. There's a lot. One of the biggest things that I got out of therapy was I actually ended up realizing that I'm a very anxious person. And I have a lot of anxiety. And I started to realize that my brother is also very anxious. And we started to say, it's my mom can be anxious sometimes. So we carry on these characteristics from, inherited characteristics. And I'm kind of going long-winded with this. But one of the things that therapy really helped me with was actually being self-aware of these things that I'm doing. And to ask myself, why did I do this? Not like giving myself a hard time, but just asking, why did you do that? Oh, that's a good question. Why did I do that? Why do I feel this way? Why? So just to continue to ask yourself these questions, I think is very great with therapy. Also, it's just nice to have somebody to give a sounding board to. So my therapist, I talked to her about my business. I talked to her about relationships. I talked to her about friends, family. And she is somebody who I can really trust to just listen to what I'm saying and to give me certain tools to work on it. But I think it's like anything. It's what you put into it too. Because I've had friends who've gone to therapy and my friend was like, I got nothing out of the first session. I'm like, well, what do you expect? If you want to build a house, you put one brick down. That's not a house. You got to keep building the house, right? So that's one thing I would say. You just got to put work into it. But yeah, I mean, other things I think that I could share with people that I've learned from therapy are to take pause. Definitely take pause. As we talked about, admire what you've done. Appreciate what you've done, especially in our culture of hustle and grind, right? It's never enough. Like if you go on Instagram, you're going to feel it's not enough, right? But to really kind of have that perspective to take a look at yourself and take a look at what you've done and to appreciate the things. And I would say another thing that I've really gained out of it is gratitude. And gratitude, I think all of them kind of all tie in together. Gratitude especially has been huge for me because yeah, like I said, going back to what I said earlier, like if you would have looked at where you were 5 years ago, then generally speaking, your old self would be like, wow, good job, right? Like I know my old, if I went back to when I first started real estate, like there was times when I was doing real estate. So I worked at the bank for 8 years previously and I had a solid job. I worked my way up. I knew that I was going to hit a ceiling, but I was just very unhappy there. So at that time, I actually got up to 190 pounds. I was smoking cigarettes every day. I was extremely unhealthy. I had problems breathing. I was in a really, really bad place. And then that's when I realized man, my job is actually making me very, very sad. My job is, I need something that's going to make me excited. What's going to get me going? Yeah. Right. And through that, got into real estate. But the first couple of years were really, really hard. I'm talking about I was making a quarter of what I was making at the bank. And you have a lot of self-doubt and you kind of don't, you're like, oh shit, should I do this? I'm sure you same thing with the podcast, right? There is dark days. And a lot of times people only see the end result. So they're like, oh, this is it right here. But I'm like, yo, there's a lot of grind to kind of get to this point. So I know I'm just kind of going everywhere with this, but yeah, just kind of appreciating your journey, appreciating where you've come from. And the other thing that my therapist always tells me, because being somebody who's super anxious, is the sky's not falling. It's okay. It's okay. Because for me, sometimes if I get into something, maybe something crazy happens, I'll just start bombing my therapist, just texting her like crazy. Oh, this is how I feel, this is how I feel, this is how I feel. And she always tells me, stop. The sky's not going to fall tomorrow. Relax, breathe, and you'll be fine.
That's great, actually.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I do is I remind myself tomorrow's another day.
Exactly.
Right. And I disassociate with the things that happened the day prior. Obviously I remember the ideas, but I don't pull the feelings from prior days to present day.
Yes.
Right. So that's really helped me a lot. Where before I would just constantly live in the past and sometimes in the future. Yep. And the present was almost non-existent because I'm just consumed by both sides. Right.
Right.
But to remind those things are independent of each other. right? Like what happened yesterday doesn't have to happen today.
Yeah.
Right. And what happens in the future, yeah, it might be dependent on today, but like if you're only thinking about the future, not doing anything in the present, nothing's gonna get moving 100%. Along, right? You're just gonna be paralyzed.
100%, and just having the self-belief in yourself too. Just believing in yourself, believing that whether it's work, whether it's life, whether it's relationships, like believing in yourself, like, yo, you can do it. You can do it. We're always our biggest critic. Yeah. Yourself is always your biggest critic to yourself. But I always think like we should also be our biggest cheerleader. We should be bigging ourselves up every day. But that's something that a lot of people don't do as much, right?
Yeah. It's funny. It's like when I was younger, I used to have this confidence to me. Yeah. Right. Which almost definitely came off as arrogance.
You're right.
Right. And something that
it's a fine line.
Yeah. Something I noticed that I'm really bad at doing as I'm speaking to you about this is I'm really bad at balancing. Right. Meaning now I'm not sure if you feel this for me, but like the amount of confidence I have is not quite to the level of like arrogance. And it's almost put me, or at least the way I feel about myself, it's put me the opposite way where I'm like kind of unconfident. And it's really hard for me to say things with certainty. And I'm trying to find that balance again. Right. But I don't want to go too far off to the side. And that's why it's really hard for me to be my own cheerleader, because becoming too egotistical became cringe. Right. I would cringe at myself like, oh, what the fuck are you thinking? That I'm now in the opposite end where it's like there's self-doubt. Yeah. And I want to bring it back to where I have a realistic expectation of what's happening. Like, what's going on now, really?
Yeah, I was going to say to that point, I think it's like kind of that mindfulness and having that confidence in yourself. It's not like an arrogance, right? But you're just confident in yourself. For example, let's use our work. You know you're a damn good mortgage broker. I know I'm a damn good real estate agent. We're not being cocky. It's just is what it is. The results speak for themselves, right? Yeah. So I would say for you, like, yeah, man, continue to just have that confidence in yourself because you're killing it, bro.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. Thank you. It's weird because, speaking about that, it almost feels like that's a separate part of me, right? Where I can't bring it to the other side. Yeah. Like being good at that job doesn't make me feel confident about the other things in my life, right? Okay. Like I don't know if I'm good at this podcasting thing. I don't, right? And the only thing that drives me is like the purpose.
Do you think that you have imposter syndrome?
I don't think that I have imposter syndrome because I bring down where my confidence lies, if that makes sense. So, like I mentioned, like I don't think that I'm good at this yet, quite, right?
I would beg to differ, and I think your viewers would beg to differ as well, but that's okay.
Thank you. And but to me, what that does is it allows me to think, oh, I got more work to do,
right?
And that humbles me, right? It's like there's so much more that I have to develop and become knowledgeable about and be able to speak, but that's also why I don't speak in like very definite answers.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say that's why I know you'll be successful, because you're not okay with status quo. You'll always continue like to push, but I think, and this is me too, where it's like you just don't want to push yourself too much either. Like still being able to like understand, but like also like being able to like smell the flowers.
Yeah, right? I struggle with that. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like people around me are more proud of my accomplishments than me. Where I'm like, really, you see that? Yeah, and I'm like, I think it's all right. Yeah, and it's weird because it doesn't feel wrong to feel like that. It feels almost like, oh yeah, he's being humble or whatever. But at the same time, I'm like, it almost feels like to me, I'm just being unconfident, not even just humble. If people speak about me, like, dude, I love your podcast. I'm like, thanks, it's all right.
You got to talk your talk. That's what I mean. Like, you got to be able to talk your talk. Like, I think if you are mindful of not being cocky, you will not come off as cocky, but you're just confident in your abilities. And then talking about, like, again, my therapist helping me get to this mindfulness aspect of it. It's like, you're a superstar, and you should be able to be okay knowing that you're a superstar.
Wow.
It's true. Like, and even like in our industries, right? Like the industries that we're in, right? There's thousands of us. That doesn't mean you can't be Michael Jordan. Doesn't mean you can't be Kobe. Doesn't mean you can't be the Tom Brady in your industry. Yeah. Why can't you be? Right? And be confident and knowing that you can, because you put in the work, because you're mindful that you need to put in that work, right? You're not okay with the status quo. You have a hell of a work ethic, right? So like all those things already should tell you, okay, I'm on my way to getting there, right? Or if I'm not already there.
All right, Paul, got some questions for you.
All right, let's do it.
All right, first question. What makes you uniquely you?
I would say what uniquely makes me different is my personality. I think being able to have a North American view of things with a little bit of the Asian culture has really made me uniquely me. Being Japanese and Canadian is actually Japanese Chinese is actually a very rare mix I've been finding as well. Yeah, I mean, and then just my personality. I would say most people say like I'm a very positive person, very, very positive person, and very outgoing and upbeat. And I have found that that's not usual with a lot of people. I'm very, very positive person. That's also because of a near-death experience as well. But yeah, I would say very, very positive. Very, very positive person.
And second question is, what was a monumental event in your life that's changed everything for you?
So I would normally say the near-death experience would be the big one, but now it would be going to therapy.
Oh, wow.
That to me has changed so much about myself. Like I said, I used to have a very quick wick. So I'd get angry over things. I'd get frustrated over things. I would be a little bit more judgmental towards people. I would be more closed-minded. All those things I had before. Toxic personality, sometimes some toxic traits maybe would come out. But since having therapy and cleaning out my closet, really cleaning out all the everything and really being like essentially allowing myself to be an open book and really taking a look and reevaluating myself, that's actually helped change me so much for the better.
All right, and my third question is, how do you want to be remembered?
I would want to be remembered as the guy that you can call and he'll be there for you. And he's going to tell you like it is. Maybe won't be the nicest way to say it sometimes, but I'm going to tell you like it is. And they're going to know that everything that I did is because I love them and I care for them.
Thanks, Paul, for coming on, man.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
Of course, man. We've been friends for so long, and I
appreciate you.
Love this because this brings us a little bit closer.
Definitely.
And these conversations, I feel like it's hard, and you're kind of putting me in a position where now I can speak to everyone else more openly, right? So thank you for all that.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, it's actually been really, really nice to have you to have me on the podcast, like for you to have me on the podcast, and like I said, just to see how far you guys have come, like amazing.
Thank you, brother. Do you mind letting the audience know where they can find you?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on my socials, PSUGI91, PSUGI91 on Instagram.
And thank you to the audience for watching all the way through. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment below what you guys want us to talk about next time. And remember, live fast and eat ass.